From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 219, recorded on July 20, 2023. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me today from Fort Lee, New Jersey, Dixon Despommier.
Hello, Vincent and everybody else. It looks like a nice day out there, but it's hot and humid, so it's not such a nice day out there.
Dixon, every day you're alive is a nice day.
Every day as we're listening, believe me, no one knows that more than I do. I thank whatever I should thank.
Carl Sagan. Thank Carl Sagan.
Billions and billions of stars.
Also
That's
joining
right.
us
we're part of one.
From New York, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everyone.
And
Hello,
from
Daniel.
Glasgow, Scotland, Christina Nowla.
Hello,
Christina.
everybody. We haven't got it hot and humid here. We've got it cool and wet.
So Christina, it's summer there, isn't it?
Well, yes. It was summer in June,
You
but
call
now
it
we've gone back to
summer.
normal west of Scotland weather. It's kind of mixed. It's not too bad.
So it never gets really, really hot, you're saying. Is that correct?
Let's
Well, I
hope
think mid-20s, I think, would be
That's about
maximum. Yeah, but that's just kind of perfect, really.
but Europe's being cooked
So I hear, yes.
as we speak, and so is our American Southwest. Phoenix has had 20 days in a row of a temperature over 110 degrees.
huh? Wow.
20 days in a row.
Well, today
Climate
we
change?
have we have parasites for you, and we
We
are
do.
going to first read everyone's email who sent in guesses. So Daniel, remind us of our case from last time, please.
All right. I looked through a little of the emails. I think people had some fun this time, so I'm glad to have triggered that. But we discussed. Let me remind people tuning back in and share for the first time for those people tuning in for the first time. We discussed the case of a 19-month-old female who seems to be having some issues. Lots of increased respiratory effort, even with minimal exertion, some issue with loose stools, and then followed by the onset of some facial swelling. As mentioned, no significant past medical or past surgical history. Fairly confident that there's not a smoking or drinking of alcohol going on, not HIV positive. On exam, the increased respiratory effort is audible, and actually told folks that I was informed that direct testing revealed coccidia and giardia in the stool. Now, I should add, just, maybe as a treat here. So, I got this secondhand. My wife is the one who tells me, hey, did you know so-and-so has coccidia and giardia in the stool? So what is going on? I mentioned that my daughter is home from, she just graduated university, so she's home. Lots of exposure as opposed to my middle daughter, who's hardworking and as a consequence has less exposure. But should I be worried about the daughter who has lots of exposure? What's going on? What should be the next steps?
All right. Christina, can you take the first one?
I can, but first I just wanted to say, Daniel, what an interesting phone conversation to have, isn't it?
Well,
Having
it
coccidia
gets-
and giardia in your stool.
Oh, it gets more interesting.
Okay. Okay, let me read that first one. Stefan writes, Dear TWiP team, greetings from Heidelberg again, cloudy 17C today, which necessitated wearing a long-sleeve T-shirt again. To the case, I believe the findings of giardia and coccidia are surrogates, proxies, only to the little girl's exposure to dogs and possibly dog feces. A frequently encountered helminth parasite is Toxocara canis, the dog roundworm, for which humans are dead-end hosts. Apart from ocular larva migrans, would need to check this girl. Visceral larva migrans is a possible symptom complex, which resembles larvae migrating through various parts of the body. Possibly symptoms are abdominal pain, stool irregularities, wheezing, and in rare cases also central nervous symptoms, CNS invasion. Indirect effects are allergic phenomena like rashes or, in this case, facial swelling. For antiparasitic therapy, there is little evidence, but in view of possible consequences, albendazole is strongly recommended in addition to supportive care. Inhalative steroids in this case and systemic steroids may be considered in some cases. Hoping my guess is correct and I'm lucky enough to win a book. Best regards, Stefan. And he has a postscript disclosure, no ChatGPT used.
Dixon.
Joshua writes, Dear TWiPers, as the patient described at the end of episode 218 seems to be of the canine variety, I thought to consult my two laboratory labradoodles, Harold and Eliza, about the symptoms, likely diagnosis, and potential treatment of this case. Based on their characteristic behaviors, however, Harold would be puzzled while Eliza would bark loudly, wag her tail, and tilt her head from side to side before giving me a knowing glance without telling me what she thinks. Though dogs are man's best friend and like to be patted unless they have been trained to sniff out a specific pathogen, they are not able to give veterinary advice. I decided not to consult Annabelle the cat either, as her opinions of dogs are very poor, and she keeps her secret knowledge of the world to herself. Canine coccidia and giardia are generally subclinical infections of dogs and would not produce the facial swelling. Is that angioedema, Daniel? Is that what they call angioedema?
So angioedema is a type of facial swelling, but we'll have to see if that's what we're talking about.
Okay, fine. And respiratory effort described. If a fungal infection is possible, I would suggest Aspergillus fumigatus or another soil-borne species which can cause those symptoms. According to a 2012 paper available online entitled A Review of the Pathology and Treatment of Canine Respiratory Infections by Vincent, Pinheiro, and Lerothi, such fungal rhinitis can present with an array of distressing symptoms, including mucopurulent discharge, sneezing, epistaxis, nasal dyspigmentation, or ulceration. Stertor or stridor, and facial deformity with or without lacrimal duct obstruction and epiphora. Epistaxis means a nosebleed. Stertor and stridor, noisy breathing, and epiphora, watery eyes. So why not say so? Why all these fancy terms, right? Treatment would best make use of topical antifungal treatments instilled into a nasal cavity. However, if a fungal infection is not within the permit of TWiP, then it would be a case of nasal infection with an aquatic protistan parasite. Rhinosporidium sibieri, never heard of it, though sporadic cases thereof have only been reported from the southern U.S., no further north than Missouri, which is a long way from Central Park, I believe, and facial swelling is not reported as a symptom of this protist. Infection with this parasite produces a nasal polyp. Treatment is excision thereof. Many thanks, as always, for your wonderful work. Yours, Joshua, on behalf of Harold, Eliza, and Annabella. Sorry.
Daniel.
Shan writes, Dear Dr. Griffin and Pack. Clever. Thank you for this most difficult and challenging case regarding the 19-month-old female patient with respiratory issues, loose stools, and facial swelling. This poor patient sounds sick as a dog. What could be going on here? Allow me to relay my pet theory. Given that testing has revealed canine coccidia and giardia, I suspect this patient has canine coccidia and giardia. However, these parasitic infections explain the loose stools, but not the facial swelling and increased respiratory effort. I suspect this poor girl is battling multiple afflictions. As we know, Occam was not a doctor of veterinary medicine, and this patient can have as many diseases as she darn well pleases. Sounds like an allergic reaction in addition to the parasites. Did this 19-month-old get into the kitchen trash and eat something she shouldn't have? Was she bitten by a tick, a spider? Re-listening to the case and looking for clues, I noted the following. Firstly, the mere mention of Paul Kelly inflamed my latent trust issues from TWiP 109, in which Paul led us down the garden path regarding the species of the afflicted patient. Secondly, I noticed Dr. Griffin's unusual pronunciation of Jeff Bezos. Initially, I chalked this up to Dr. Griffin being an NYU grad, centimeter and all. But it was the shout out to Chevy Chase that got my gears turning. I eschewed recent trends and consulted YouTube instead of ChatGPT. A search for Chevy Chase and bees furnished me with Chevy's famous Killer Bees Saturday Night Live skit, and I knew the case was closed. Our patient is a dog with multiple parasitic infections and a bee sting to the snout. My treatment plan is as follows. Reassure the patient that she's a good girl. Sulfamethoxine for the coccidia, fenbendazole for the giardia, diphenhydramine for the bee sting, and 1 cup kibble BIT. With regard to the 22-year-old daughter who has had a lot of contact with the patient, the chances of parasitic infection are low but possible, and Dr. Griffin's daughter is likely fine, provided she can run really fast from the bees. I expect at this point the patient has embarked on her road to recovery and has gained a new leash on life. Sorry for the torrent of obvious dog jokes you are no doubt receiving from every submission this month, but you brought this upon yourself. Please give your poor pooch a scratch behind the ears for me. Hope she's doing well. All the best from sunny Snohomish, Washington, Shan.
Oh, this can't be a dog, Daniel. How could that be? How could that be? Giovanni writes, "Hi, TWiP team. I don't have much biology experience. Took some classes in college, but swiftly changed my major to economics as I struggled with the memorization aspect. However, I've still maintained my love for science, and I'm very excited to tackle this case. This being a 19-month-old dog dealing with labored breathing and swelling of the face. Giovanni doesn't mess around. He just says it's a dog right away.
Right to it.
Loose stool and feces tested positive for canine coccidia and giardia. Your little pup must have consumed the feces of another dog infected with the parasites. Also, as facial swelling may be caused by an allergic reaction, could be that the little one somehow got access to contaminated food they were not supposed to be eating. However, as both canine coccidia and giardia cause diarrhea, canine coccidia symptoms include dehydration and lethargy. This could be what's causing the labored breathing, while the facial swelling might be a sign of an allergic reaction. Finally, as most forms of coccidia in dogs don't transmit to humans, and giardia transmission also has a low probability, your 22-year-old could be fine. That said, there is a species of coccidia called Cryptosporidium, which can infect humans, and this is a particularly worrisome parasite. The dog should begin treatment right away, and it could be helpful that your daughter gets checked to ensure no sneaky parasite made the jump. P.S. Thank you for all you do. I listened to almost all of your shows, and because of an episode of TWiP, I was motivated to learn more about the immune system by picking up How the Immune System Works by Lauren Sompirak. All right, back to the top. Christina.
Paul writes, ChatGPT not used. Literature research takes a few minutes to figure out the main points of the solution. This is the story of Dr. Griffin's daughter's 19-month-old dog who is infected with canine coccidia and giardia. She will not become infected with canine coccidia, as this does not infect humans. The risk for her being infected with giardia depends on the genotype. Giardia has 8 genotypes termed assemblages. Assemblages A and B can infect both dogs and humans. Assemblages C and D, common in dogs, do not infect humans. The symptoms of respiratory effort and facial swelling are due to undernutrition, anemia, or low albumin caused by the infection. Coccidia and Giardia in dogs may be asymptomatic or cause similar symptoms, so it is not possible to be sure which organisms, or if both, are causing the illness. Treatment: both organisms are susceptible to metronidazole, so that would be the first option. Paul.
Dixon.
Michelle and Alexander from the First Vienna Parasitology Passion Club write, Dear dog casters, we were unable to find a unifying diagnosis for this canine patient. We can only hypothesize that she is suffering from an infection with several parasites, which we will list below. Regarding the question of infectivity for adult humans, we came up with some more relevant information. 3 symptoms were described in the case. Increased work of breathing. This symptom was noted before the onset of diarrhea or facial swelling. Lungs are clear with auscultation. Therefore, cardiac pathology or anemia seem the most likely causes. Diarrhea. There are many causes of loose stools, but the organisms isolated would explain this symptom. Facial swelling. From the description given, it is unclear whether this is localized swelling as a result of one or several masses, or if it is edema. Likely causes of facial edema include allergy, cardiac, or vascular obstruction. Assuming that the diarrhea is caused by the protozoan in the stool, an infection with Dirofilaria immitis could explain increased work of breathing and congestion of the superior vena cava, if indeed dogs have one of those. This worm is transmitted via mosquito bite and is commonly found in the eastern United States. An unlikely differential is acanthococcus. While dogs usually harbor the adult tapeworm within their GI tract, they can rarely present with cystic echinococcus. Pulmonary lesions could explain respiratory distress, and a burst of cyst could lead to an anaphylactic reaction with facial swelling and diarrhea. While Dirofilaria species only cause rare cases of aberrant infection in humans, some Coccidia and Giardia species can be transmitted to humans and can cause symptomatic infection. It is therefore important to practice good hygiene when dealing with your dog's excretions. Other parasites to watch out for include several intestinal protozoa, Necator, Ancylostoma, Trichuris, Tania, and Toxocara. Thank you for this great case. All the best. Michelle and Alexander from the First Vienna Parasitology Passion Club. P.S. If it's possible, we would like to submit a case to the podcast. It concerns a common illness we often encounter in clinic and has not been discussed on TWiP as of yet. Intriguing.
So I met Michelle at ASM Microbe in Houston recently.
Oh, cool.
She came up to me. She said, I'm Michelle from the First Vienna Parasitology.
That's great.
So I thought you were in Vienna. She said, well, I'm here. What do you think, Daniel? Could they submit a case?
That would be fantastic. So yeah, send the case. What would Daniel at microbe.tv?
No,
would that work?
TWiP at microbe. Yeah, it could be Daniel too. And and then maybe we could get one of the two or two on to do the reveal, right?
That would be great. Yeah, because once we get connected, then we could chat and kind of get the whole mystery case presentation, and then bring one or both of you on for the unveil. That would be fantastic.
Okay,
sounds exciting.
I'll work on that. Meanwhile, Daniel, you are next.
Yeah, because I'm going to run out of cases eventually, right?
No, I don't think so. Well, maybe when you retire.
I guess when I retire and I stop seeing so many cases. But all right, Kimona writes, Dear TWiP team, I think our patient is a dog, perhaps still a puppy at 19 months. She harbors canine coccidia and an unknown Giardia subgroup in her stool. Multiple genera and species cause coccidiosis, and each tends to be species-specific with a few exceptions like T. gondii. References were made to TWiP episode 110 discussing avian malaria infections at the Bronx Zoo. I found very little on canine Plasmodium disease, except that it is mainly caused by P. malariae. Based on Paul Kelly's description in penguins, the resulting vasculitis can affect multi-organ inflammation and cause pulmonary edema in the lungs and consequent dyspnea, at least in birds. Was the dog visiting the zoo and bitten by a Plasmodium-infected mosquito? Clinical coccidia and giardia in dogs are either asymptomatic or present with mainly diarrheal disease, and only puppies and immunocompromised adults are likely to develop severe disease with enteritis. Extreme dehydration and malnourishment might cause an increased respiratory effort and possibly audible panting. The prevalence of giardia in dogs can, in some shelters and kennels, be as high as 100%. Giardia intestinalis or duodenalis is divided into assemblages, AB, or potentially zoonotic with risk of transmission from dog to human. C/D are host-specific to dogs, G. canis, and rarely zoonotic. The swollen face has me stumped. Aside from a bee sting or adverse allergic reaction, other causes would include lymphatic obstruction or primary heart failure. Apparently, in dogs, heart failure can present with upper body swelling extending to the head and face and might also trigger pulmonary edema, hypoxia, and panting. So is there a secondary infection causing heart failure symptoms? Several helminthic infections common to dogs have the potential to do this. Heartworm, Dirofilaria immitis, will eventually infect pulmonary vasculature. Hookworm, Ancylostoma species suck blood in the intestines, causing anemia. Roundworm, Toxocara canis, can cause recurring diarrhea, and pulmonary edema from larval migration through the lungs, likewise for strongyloides. To be clear, I am coming up short with a definitive diagnosis, and my best conclusion is that our patient is a shelter pup, perhaps suboptimally treated with anti-helminthics, and now dehydrated and malnourished from chronic diarrhea. If the giardia is assemblage C or D, it is unlikely to be of risk to Daniel's daughter, whereas assemblage A or B could be if proper hygiene is not followed. Canine coccidia should not be infectious to humans, as Cyclospora cayetanensis is listed as the only coccidial protozoan to cause human disease. But I cannot imagine that this pup's clinical condition would have evaded Daniel's scrutiny prior to deteriorating into florid heart failure. There must be a better explanation that I eagerly await to hear. In anticipation, Kimona.
Okay, I think I will take these last two because one is short. Gina writes, I'm stumped because Daniel actually told us both infections. Is it the patient we are guessing? The stool sample was positive for giardia and canine coccidia, so that's my guess. I guess. Is it one of Daniel's lovable canines? You guys are the best. Thank you, Gina. All right. Martha writes, as is usual, I may have delayed too long in responding. I will try to keep this short as I think you will get a lot of responses. Case in episode 218 seems to present us with 3 questions. 1, what species is the patient? 2, what is causing the increased respiratory effort, facial swelling, and diarrhea? 3, and is Dr. Griffin's daughter at risk? We are given the information that the stool is positive for canine coccidia and giardia, species not specified. We are told also the case was discussed with Dr. Paul Kelly, head vet at the Wildlife Conservation Society, and we are recommended the TWiP episode with Dr. Kelly. That was an excellent episode about avian malaria in penguins. So to sort this out, I have wandered around the internet checking out vet med sites. My guesses are 1, most likely the patient is a dog. The canine coccidia is a good hint. I could imagine Dr. Griffin harboring penguins or other exotic birds from non-malarial regions, but I think it might have come up in prior discussions. That's good. 2, is it malaria? I read that dogs can be infected by P. malariae, which I think is not currently in circulation in the New York City area. The mosquito-borne illness they are more at risk for is from Dirofilaria immitis. The symptoms of increased respiratory effort and facial swelling are on the list of disease manifestations. The symptoms of canine coccidia and giardia mostly are diarrhea-related, so I'm guessing dirofilaria is the main problem. The dog likely has no idea who William of Ockham is and therefore may have more than one disease. 3, dirofilaria can infect humans if bitten by a mosquito containing the parasite, not by contact with the dog. According to Google, canine coccidia is not a problem for humans. Giardia from the dog, I assume, could present with the usual symptoms of giardiasis, but I am sure that Dr. Griffin's daughter has excellent hand hygiene, so is at low risk. Hope I'm not too late. Best wishes to you all from soggy eastern Massachusetts. All right, that will do it for our guys. These are very amusing, aren't they?
Some of them are really funny, yeah.
Well thought out. Well thought out.
It's good.
And Daniel, did he say measles?
Who knows?
Who knows? I was trying to kind of think, did he? Did he not? I couldn't remember.
Yeah, well, I don't know,
All
Daniel.
right.
Sometimes that one emailer really gave you a lot of credit for amazing hints.
Yeah, maybe too much credit.
Yeah, I think so.
So should I? I'm trying to figure out. Should I give a little more of the interesting history, and then we can have a little bit of discussion? Because in a sense, basically, well, as one of the terse emails commented, you gave us the diagnosis, sort of. Right. So here's the story. So my wife's on the phone. The dog, has been returned to the folks that care for the 18-month-old puppy. It is a dog. Yes, you got that. And my wife takes that phone call, and then the whole discussion, as maybe some of our listeners know, I actually have two dogs that are pets, right? So we have Hattie. She's the what I like to say the failed service dog, but that's not a bad thing. Only 40% pass rate, and we love her to death, but she's definitely more of a pet than a working dog. And our Cocker Spaniel, Pippin, Peregrine, so Pippin is his nickname. And so the suggestion is, how are your dogs doing? And perhaps you should get them tested. So I will comment that little Pippin is been having some loose, sticky, hard to clean up stools. We actually looked at some photos, and when you look really close, you can see Pippin has a little bit of swelling in his face as well, which is just interesting. It's sort of subtle. As far as the difficulty breathing, maybe I'm just like hypersensitive because no one else seems to notice it. But I'm like, yeah, there's just, this was sort of my first clue that something was just a little bit off. So we collect some poo, and by we, I mean my wife, collects some poo from Pippin, some poo from Hattie, and sends it off to the veterinarian. We actually waited a period of time before sending it off with some ideas in our heads about potential incubation periods. And then the call comes from the veterinarian, our veterinarian here. And he starts talking to my wife, and very quickly she says, why don't you just talk to my husband? So I have this wonderful conversation with this veterinarian. And this is he's a young veterinarian. He's only been in practice for a few years now. He's enjoying the post-COVID-19 pandemic puppy boom. And he has actually sent off the stool for molecular testing. And we're going to have a conversation about the molecular specifics of the pathogens. Because as you can imagine, telling me it's a coccidia is just not enough. I want to know more. What type of coccidia?
That's right.
So it turns out, and I think people will just a little bit more, this is actually Cystoisospora canis, which used to be Isospora canis, right? So it was renamed, as we've discussed. And Giardia, and I said, which Giardia? And it's actually Giardia duodenalis. Now, we didn't go into the specific AB versus CD, subtypes. Well, what ends up happening is the 18-month-old puppy is treated with two different medicines. One medicine for the Cystoisospora, the other for the Giardia. We also treat our two dogs, and interesting enough, I have a couple of conversations here. So everybody is now doing much better. Hattie was absolutely fine. I mean, Hattie could eat chocolate and grapes and not flinch. So who knows? She was fine all the time. But Pippin now actually has poo that is easy to retrieve on the evening walks. We threw a little pumpkin in there to help, make things a little bit better.
Thank heavens for thunderstorms.
Yeah, and the 18-month-old is also completely better. And interesting enough, I was asking, like, what's up with the facial swelling, right? I mean, it's sort of subtle, I have to say. It's not, you brought up, Dixon, is it angioedema? Is it a big? It's really when you sort of look them head on and compare to other photos, you could see that there's a little more fullness in the face. And apparently, they were saying that this is something that often sort of gives them a heads up that they might want to do a stool testing. But happy ending. Everyone has now been treated. Everyone is doing well. But yeah, Dixon, you bring it up, right? It's nice that there are these heavy flooding rainstorms to just wash away a lot of the stuff.
That's right. I totally agree. But someone wrote in as one of their answers that the only coccidian that humans can get is, let's see, which one did they list?
Kimona was saying that, actually. She said only Cyclospora. So, yeah, so
that's
Dixon, maybe you want to go down that road. What other coccidian?
Well, we should consult our textbook for this one. But, Azospora belli is one of them.
Which now Cystoispora.
Yeah, Cystoispora belli. And then I guess, I don't know, Daniel, have you seen others besides those two?
There's also some microsporidium. So yeah, there are once you start going. So yeah, it is a little broader, but yeah.
Yeah.
So
the more you look, the more you see.
But yeah, those weren't actually hints. Jeff Bezos was actually supposed to show up, and he just apparently doesn't show up sometimes. He just sort of, leaves the empty chair. But because I really wanted to see if I could get a sail on that new sailboat he's got. And yeah, right. Chevy Chase actually did show up. So all right,
I'll be darned.
All right, we have to give away a book.
Yes,
we had seven eligible people. I'm starting to forget who have won books,
We should maybe, when people write in, they should just put in the headline, whether they've won a book or not. And also, I'm going to suggest whether or not they've received the...
Well, I haven't shipped a book in a while. I have to get on that. I have to get on that.
Guilt trip.
No, just to help us with logistics.
We have seven.
Vincent.
Okay.
It was going to get done one of these days. All right, 7 people.
You want a drum roll?
Drum roll, please. Number 6. Number 6 is Michelle and Alexander from the First Vienna Parasitology Club. That's great. Perfect winner. So I'm going to contact you guys because I have your email, because you could send us your
terrific
your case, and you could come on the show when we solve it, which will be
right.
Well, if we do, it could be in months. Who knows? Could be years, given how quickly I do things.
Yeah,
so
you're pretty good.
We'll get you in the next few months. We'll move things around.
But so for the book, send your address to TWiP@microbe.tv. If you have an outside of the U.S. address, please include your phone number. TWiP@microbe.tv. Dixon, do you have a hero?
No, I don't have a hero today.
Why not?
Sorry.
Why don't you have a hero? Explain to me.
I think we've exhausted most of the obvious
There's
ones.
no heroes left in the world of parasitology.
Well, we don't know that, but we haven't been to a meeting lately, so I really don't know who's rising above the rest and emerging as one of those larger-than-life people.
You know what you could do? You could email your buddies and say, "Hey, you got a hero," and I bet they.
I don't have any buddies. I got no buddies at all. I've been retired. I'm living like a hermit. I'm in your shoes, Vincent. No, I'm unfortunately out of touch.
Don't tell me you're in my shoes. No.
Oh my God. Vincent, are you also become a hermit?
No,
he's living in splendid isolation. I have a question for Daniel though, and that in regard to how do you classify diarrhea, as a sign or a symptom or both?
It could be both, right? I mean, so in the dogs, they're not going to come and tell you, "Hey, I've been having diarrhea." You're going to observe it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the patient,
The patient
some
could tell
patients,
you,
not
they could
all
say,
patients.
No.
because you usually don't even see the diarrhea. You go in, how many times have you had diarrhea? And they say, oh, I've had
Right.
10 watery stools, etc. This is what
Yeah.
it's like. So usually you're getting it in a history from a human.
Okay.
But, think about an infant, right? An infant
Exactly right.
all over the place.
That is what I was talking.
Yeah.
That's what I was referring to.
Yep.
All right, time for a
Right.
paper. I think this was
Indeed.
Daniel's choice here. Daniel, what have we got today?
Yeah, so today we have an article, Selection for Insecticide Resistance Can Promote Plasmodium falciparum Infection in Anopheles, published in PLOS Pathogens. And the authors are Kelsey L. Adams, Emily K. Selland, Bailey C. Willett, John W. Carew, Charles Vidudes, Naresh Singh, Flaminia Kataruchia. And interesting enough, these folks are from the Department of Immunology, Infectious Disease, Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, Boston, Massachusetts, U.S., the Cambridge Harvard Center for Mass Spectrometry, the Howard Hughes Medical Institute in Chevy Chase, Maryland.
Mhm.
Ah.
Okay. And that's not why I chose. I didn't choose it just because it was Chevy Chase. It's a great article.
Right.
And so just to go through, and we can all have kind of a sort of a background discussion here. As they start off, insecticide resistance poses a severe threat for malaria control. And we've talked a little bit about this massive effort to deploy insecticide treated bed nets throughout much of the world, not just sub-Saharan Africa, but all through Asia. And one of the challenges that we're now running across is resistance to the pyrethroid insecticides. The active component of most of these insecticide-treated nets is now widespread, particularly, as they mentioned, in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is kind of an issue. Just to talk a little bit about, I may be able to give kind of our overview. They're going to be asking about, so is there any kind of an impact on these resistant insects as far as their ability to harbor and spread Plasmodium falciparum? So just think about it this way. Okay, we killed a whole bunch of mosquitoes. There's a certain number of mosquitoes that are left. Now, these mosquitoes are starting to do quite well because they're resistant. Now, maybe there was a fitness cost. Now, maybe they're just not going to carry as much of the Plasmodium. Maybe it's all okay. Or maybe this is a bad science fiction movie, and now they've become super mosquitoes, and they harbor lots and lots of the Plasmodium and are more of a menace.
You would call that a gain of function.
I would not use that terminology, but you can wander down that path. So just to give people a little bit of a sense of, they say pyrethroid. So the pyrethroids are axonic excitotoxins, and they actually prevent the closure of the voltage-gated sodium channels, so the nerves cannot repolarize. So it's like a neurotoxic agent for our poor mosquitoes. Not a lot of sympathy for mosquitoes probably in the crowd. So we kind of go through. We got a lot here. This is a big meaty article. But, as we mentioned, the greatest reductions in the malaria burden in the last 20 years have been felt to be facilitated by these long-lasting insecticide-treated nets impregnated with these pyrethroids. And just sort of, I want to make this distinction. We're talking about insecticides versus insect repellents, right? Our insect repellents, we might be thinking about DEET or picaridin, right, which are going to actually interfere with the whole odorant and chemoattractant behavior. And so couple things they talk about here is one is sort of the mechanism. So how do mosquitoes become resistant? And they talk about a metabolic resistance, which basically is going to upregulate some enzymes that metabolize things. There's a target site resistance, right? So the target site that is going to mediate this neurotoxicity could change. And there's also what they talk about is this cuticular resistance, right? So these are our three resistance that we're going to be thinking about. Basically, you've got a thickened cuticle. So you're actually going to protect the insect from the insecticide penetrating them. And now they're going to ask a couple questions. When you have these mutations, is it going to impact fecundity? Is it going to impact mating success? Is there going to be different larval development? And where we're really going to go is it going to impact this vector as in its role as Plasmodium transmitting? So one of the challenges they do talk about is that there's actually a lot of different mechanisms here. And they actually talk about a little of the evidence suggesting that we might end up with impacts on the oocyst prevalence and potentially sporocyte prevalence. So they're going to create, to check this out, from the same genetic background, a resistant and a susceptible mosquito population. And so we're gonna start off with, because we're at figure 1. Are people reading along? Hopefully they're reading along. And they basically undergo this selection pressure, and they've generated these resistant and susceptible colonies, similar genetic background, and these are from wild VK5 female mosquitoes in Burkina Faso. On TWiP, you have to specify which type of female you're talking about, as we've all just learned. And they find that the target site resistance mutation, KDRL1014F, is present in the resistant colony at an allele frequency of 52%, while it's nearly absent in the susceptible colony. So I think that's something to be thinking about. We're generating a resistant population, and it's a target site resistance mutation.
Daniel, what's really interesting is they tried to lose the resistance by passaging 38 generations without any insecticide. It wouldn't go away.
Would not.
Kind of a problem if you think about it, right?
It's very weird. Usually the resistance goes away if you don't have selection, right?
Usually there's going to be some sort of a fitness cost, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so if there's a fitness cost, but if there's no impact on fitness, there's no pressure, right? You'd have to somehow, yeah.
So Daniel, in general, in bacteria, antimicrobial resistance typically imparts a fitness cost, right? And so you lose it in the absence.
That's true in bacteria. That's true, well, as we see in HIV, so certain viruses. So we see it in fungi. So it's a fairly common sort of situation where there's a fitness, some sort of metabolic or other cost. And when you take away the pressure that's driving this, then you lose that. So, this would have been a nice thing to see, like, if we just stop for a while, it'll come back and the wild type will take over. And then, maybe we could sort of peer out. But the fact that it may just persist even once we stop providing that trigger, that is worrisome, as we're going to potentially see.
So they actually had to create those strains by back crossing them with a susceptible strain, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, and then we'll go on to figure 2. These are all like beautiful color figures, so they paid the extra. And here you're actually seeing some information about target site mutation, right? So you're seeing that KDR allele frequency, susceptible resistance, but they're also then looking at metabolic resistance. So as we talked about, you can actually upregulate the cytochrome, so you can actually increase the metabolism. So interesting stuff. And now here we talk about something that I think really matters, is males versus females, right? It's the females that we would think is where we really need to focus. So they evaluated whether the resistance line carried fitness costs, which we've been talking about. They saw no difference in fertility, fecundity, or longevity in blood-fed females, but they did report a modest decrease in the longevity of the resistant females. But what do they mean by modest? A median lifespan of 20 days versus 21. Really just not a lot in there. And that was only when they were fed on sugar, right? So
Right.
if you're fed on blood meals, and they also observed a decrease in male longevity. And here, they say significant, but they're talking about 27 versus 31 days, right? So we can all have a discussion about how significant that is. I mean, as a percent of 30, when you only live 31 days, losing 4 is a lot, right?
Yeah.
This is all true.
Okay, now we are moving on to figure 3, according to my notes.
Here we go.
Okay.
This is the money figure.
This is the
That's
money,
right.
This
That
is
is
the
right.
money phase, because now they investigate whether the females, right, as we care about, whether they differ in their capacity to support the P. falciparum infections. And surprisingly, I like that, they detected.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I like when they have the word surprisingly. They detected significantly higher number of oocysts in the midgut of the resistant compared to the susceptible mosquitoes, a median 1.9 fold, so almost twice as many oocysts. They also measured the oocyst size and showed that the resistant females had 20% larger oocysts on average compared to the susceptible counterparts. And the difference in oocyst numbers and growth was reflected at the level of the sporocytes in the salivary gland, where they saw a striking 10-fold increase in the median intensity of infection.
Bizarre.
It is bizarre. Bizarre and worrisome.
Indeed. Are you listening, Jeffrey Sachs?
We will circle back to why you mentioned Jeffrey Sachs.
Indeed.
So they go on now, and they're going to in their search for possible factors, they decide to investigate lipophorin, which is a lipid transporter. They perform RNA silencing of the lipophorin in both the resistant and susceptible females prior to an infectious blood meal, with the, as they say, the expectation that if higher levels are linked to higher infection intensities in RES, they should see some impact on the number of oocysts after the LP knockdown. And indeed, while in controls, they detected the expected increase in oocyst intensity in resistant compared to susceptible. LP silencing removed this difference by strongly decreasing the number of oocysts in the resistant, while really only having some marginal effects in the susceptible.
And they looked at this because it could have played some role in the cuticle thickening, right?
They have this whole, and they kind of go into this, that there's going to be impacts on lipid abundance. And so since this is a lipid transporter, they're feeling like maybe lipid levels. And they actually go on to detect a 55% decrease in total lipid abundance, and then decreases observed in sphingolipids, neutrolipids. So, yeah, sort of an interesting, and this sort of brings us to those who are still following, sort of cutting right past figure 4, where we basically just saw that, yes, the upregulation of LP, to figure 5, where we're actually going to see that sublethal permethrin exposure impacts the lipid profile.
Got it.
But it doesn't do anything to Plasmodium infections.
Yeah.
No.
So lots of caveats. They throw lots of caveats at us. And they say that despite all those caveats we've thrown at you, and so I recommend people reading through this data, they say demonstrate, I'm going to say suggests that the insecticide pressure can, at least in some circumstances, lead to increased vector competence for P. falciparum. While this should not be overinterpreted to suggest that insecticide resistant increases transmission likelihood in natural population, these findings stress the urgency of insecticide resistance monitoring, paralleled by careful consideration of discrete consequences of resistance selection.
So what about in the field, Daniel? What could you do to confirm? Because this is a laboratory study, and who knows the relevance to the field. How could you address this in the field?
I'm trying to think about how you sort of put together an experiment to look at the impact in the field, right? Because, one of the variables is going to be the number of mosquitoes.
Sporozoites. Or
Right?
and mosquitoes also.
Mosquitoes, yeah. And there's so many factors, I mean, some of the studies that are being done, they introduce an intervention. In this case, because of COVID-19, there was a lot of disruptions, right? So there's certain areas where there was a good supply of insecticide treated nets. Now there's some of those areas where they're not seeing it anymore. Are you seeing spikes above sort of pre bed net, once the mosquito populations are reestablished? So that would be one thing, is to try to look at, numbers of mosquitoes in given areas, and then sort of comparing areas that have had lots of bed net pressure, where you have a high incidence of the insecticide resistant mosquitoes. So I do think there are a couple creative.
So if you captured mosquitoes, you could capture thousands. What percentage would you expect to harbor Plasmodium? Would it be just looking for a needle in a haystack, or would a good fraction of them be infected?
So we sort of do the numbers, right? And I see Dixon sort of. I'll let him jump in. I think he's. But if you think about it this way, only 1% of female Anopheles mosquitoes are double biters, right? So basically, that means 1 in 100. But 1 in 200, right? Because we're only talking about females. So you're only talking about 1 in every 200 being the ones that are going to harbor.
Well, they're going to transmit.
Bob Quads.
Hold on.
No, go ahead.
They're going to transmit. The double biters will transmit.
And the double biters are the only ones that can transmit.
That's right.
Yeah. But a single biter will pick up, and it would be still interesting to know if a single biter is resistant to permethrins, will they have a higher burden of Plasmodium than not? So is that an experiment?
Yeah, that would be a great just field thing, just to say, hey, we went to this area. You could compare. This area has, maybe this is an area that hasn't had a lot of bed net usage, like parts of Sierra Leone, right? Compare that to maybe parts of Rwanda, where they have really good,
Right.
And then just look at the insecticide resistance rates in a natural population, and then you could even just do quantitative, molecular stuff. Just basically take a whole handful of milligrams of mosquito.
That's right, handful of insects. Bob Quads was my guru in the early days of my career as a parasitologist, and he used to tell me all the time that. About 1 in 1,000 female Anopheles mosquitoes in a highly endemic area, they were infected. Only 1/1000th of the population.
Okay.
And then that has to bite twice, and the odds of that happening are low. So when you look at the odds of this, you say, well, who the hell gets malaria then? But if you take a look at how many bites they get per day, Bob says,
I was going to say how many mosquitoes you have.
Little kids playing outdoors in the tropics get bitten about 1,000 times a day. That was his estimate. And 1,000 bites every day for a week, game over. It's a numbers game, but you're going to lose because you're inviting them to bite all the time.
So in these areas, is there a cloud of mosquitoes everywhere?
There can be.
Really?
There can be.
Daniel, you've been there a lot. There are lots of mosquitoes. You just barely see them.
Actually, so it's actually, when you talk about clouds of mosquitoes, that reminds me of the time I used to spend up in Alaska. I don't know if our listeners know, but I was a hospitalist in Alaska, and since my wife might listen to this, I would always try to have my trips be a little longer than they needed to be for the work, so that I could maybe get out on the river for a little bit.
Exactly.
And I remember coming around river bends, and there being so many mosquitoes that you actually needed to have like a like a screen, a little bit of mesh, like covering your face. Otherwise, you couldn't breathe. You would be inhaling like that many. I mean, so that's the thickest clouds of mosquitoes that I've ever seen, and it is actually amazing. You come around a riverbed, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm just entering what looks almost like smoke, and it's just that thick of mosquitoes. Now in areas I've been in sub-Saharan Africa, never quite as bad as, the level of mosquitoes that drives, caribou to madness. But, it's the nighttime, right? Because these tend to bite, Anopheles tend to bite at night in the darkness. It's particularly, we see a lot of problems in Uganda around December, particularly December of those years that are circumcision years in eastern Uganda, because everybody is out. And it's dark, and they're outside. They're not under the safety of a bed net after dark, and they are just being bitten and bitten.
Yeah.
All right.
The worst thing I ever saw in mosquito land was going between the United States and Canada, somewhere near southern Alberta. And there were so many mosquitoes present. This was like July. There was a sign where you handed your passport to the officer, the immigration officer from Canada. And they said, do not open your window. Hold your passport up to your window, and we will look at it. And the guy got out binoculars, and he looked at my passport. You can see all the dates and everything on them, but they didn't want to have anything to do with this. And the clouds of mosquitoes would actually impact your ability to drive. You had to stop every now and then and scrape off all the mosquitoes in order to get a clear view. It can be that intense, and that's due to irrigation. A lot of that was due to irrigation.
Now, those are going to be
Culex,
as opposed to the Anopheles. So that's important. Right. I mean, the Culex carry different pathogens.
Yes, they do.
Don't you worry. We got those too.
That's most of them viruses, by the way, Vincent.
That's right.
And the kind that make you sick.
Right.
And the kind that make you very sick.
I was just thinking, I'm really lucky that the midges, the Scottish midge in Scotland, that also forms clouds, literally clouds. I'm glad that they're not transmitting any disease.
Yeah, but I have to say, I mean, this finding was surprising to me, to think that, oh, wait a second.
Exactly.
One is, as we're seeing, that there doesn't look like there's any kind of fitness cost that is going to make this go away. We may have just done this. And now we're sort of realizing, and I don't know, probably no one ever thought about this. Hey, do you think that if they become resistant to the insecticide, somehow they're going to potentially be a more troublesome vector for Plasmodium? So, We
don't know if they're better or worse at biting, though, do we?
So there's a lot, and I think, so we started talking about what would be the next step. So, one is, yes, we started some real world outside the lab, what's going on here. And then, not only do you know how much Plasmodium they're carrying, but you might get to the point where it's a little too much, and maybe that is actually affecting the mosquitoes, and maybe then the mosquitoes are, maybe we're not seeing as much of that second biting.
That's right.
So I think there's still a lot of questions here before we just sort of say the sky has fallen.
Exactly.
Dixon,
go ahead.
Does anything other than a mosquito transmit malaria?
Nope. Oh, well, a physician can transmit it through a transfusion, if that's what you mean. Yeah, you could get, sometimes in very rare cases, it can cross the placenta and infect the infant, but mostly it's 99.9% mosquito-borne.
All right, thank you. All right. Daniel, you have a new case for us, Daniel?
Fortunately, so I like several competing, right? So this, I had the one that I was going to do, and then actually today I'm like, oh, I got a different one. I got to do this one. So this is the case, and I will give maybe a hint that we've seen several of these cases. So I picked this one because I thought it was particularly one that we probably need to write up, actually. So 73-year-old male with no significant past medical history. So really like a fit, athletic fellow. And he ends up being referred to the emergency department initially because he's developed fever, lethargy, progressive weakness for about 2 weeks. Don't really sort of figure out what's going on with him. They feel like he doesn't need to be admitted. Ends up seeing his primary care doctor Thursday of the week before he comes to see us. The PCP is a bit concerned, sends off some blood work, not really sure what's going on. And we get our first clue. The CBC demonstrates some RBC inclusions. Labs also demonstrated anemia, so he's got low hematocrit, low hemoglobin. He's got thrombocytopenia, so the platelets are low. Mildly elevated bilirubin and ALT. The primary sort of gets wind of this, and this is a bit of a hint. Starts him on azithromycin and atovaquone on Saturday. And schedules for him to be seen by our office on Monday. He comes into the office on Monday, and he's been having fevers to 102. He's having continued chills. He's noticing dark urine. He's breaking out in a sweat. And as I mentioned, this is an athletic fellow, normally rides his bike 15 miles a day, runs 3 miles a day, but now he is barely able to walk, and actually has to be brought into the clinic in a wheelchair.
Wow.
He has not been outside of Queens in the last few months. He regularly goes for runs in these wooded park areas in Queens. And then this I was always entertained by. He denies any bug bites, tick bites, rashes, or blood transfusions in the past year.
Well, Daniel, azithromycin, it's got to be COVID.
How did you know?
I have a few questions. So this guy lives alone, or does he have a family?
Well, unfortunately, he lost his wife to cancer a few years ago, so he lives alone.
Does he have any girlfriends or boyfriends or anything like that?
He does not.
Is he HIV negative?
He is HIV negative.
Has he traveled recently?
No. He said for many months now, he's just been living in Queens, doing what he does.
Well, that's the
actually,
problem, man.
And I will say, no travel outside the United States for many years.
Boy, living in Queens, that's the problem with this guy.
Dangerous place.
What does he do for eating? Does he eat at home all the time?
Yeah, he mostly eats at home.
Okay. Very interesting. All right, those are my questions.
Right.
Anything,
you asked all the ones I would ask.
Is that right? Well, I've learned from you, Dixon.
You've learned very well, thank you.
You know, the best compliment is to learn from someone.
Yeah, that's true.
Isn't it?
That is true. I'm sure there's more to ask, but I don't think we should go down that path yet, because I was intrigued by the dark urine. I should have asked, is the urine clear or is it cloudy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm trying to see how I describe it. It's sort of a dark, but not like the pyuria, not like that kind of a.
It's not like hematuria.
Helps.
Hematuria is not a description for this.
No, it's not hematuria.
Okay, thank you.
All right, folks, send your questions, send your guesses to TWiP.
Send us some questions.
You can send us questions too, but we'd like to have your guesses.
You won't get the answers.
TWiP@microbe.tv. You have about a month. It's July 20th as we record this. So
That's right.
Figure, third week of August, roughly.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We'll schedule it afterwards. So the sooner you do this, the better. Actually, I got an email as we were reading the guesses. I got one from Martha. That last one came in right now because I checked at the last minute, and there it was. So sometimes you get under the wire, sometimes you don't. So
this is all true.
TWiP@microbe.tv. You can find the show notes at microbe.tv/TWiP. And if you enjoy our work, we would love your support. Microbe.tv/contribute. Daniel Griffin is at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, parasiteswithoutborders.com. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you.
Dixon Despommier, Trichinella.org, thelivingriver.org. Thank you, Dixon.
You're welcome, Vincent. It's good to be back in the saddle.
Christina Naula is at the University of Glasgow. Thank you, Christina.
Well, thank you. And I really enjoyed that case, Daniel.
I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at virology.ws. I'd like to thank the American Society for Microbiology for their support of TWiP and Ronald Jenkins for the music. I don't know whose turn it is to sign off now. Who does it?
I'll take it.
Dixon.
I think
Sure,
you did
I'll take it.
You did it last time, but you could do
I
it
did?
again.
No. That's okay. That's
You
fine.
could-
If I did it last time, I didn't remember.
You could
Go
do
ahead.
it in
Somebody else.
perpetuity. You could do it in perpetuity, Dixon.
No, don't do that to me, please.
Why not?
Because eventually we shall all be recycling. You should make a recording and then just play that each time.
Well, we missed you, Dixon. So why don't you do it?
Yeah,
Wrap
go
it
ahead.
up.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I would be happy to do it.
All right, you've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon.
Another TWiP is parasitic.